All right, as I look at this, I'm like, wow, that's a really boring color for a guy talking about the technological aspect of writing. I'm sorry. This is just how it goes. So let's just keep you awake and live and active, and it's fun. Okay, so I do want to. So now this is what counts as a writing technology. What categories do we have? And so let's discuss some of these. In some works, specific categories of writing technologies, from what I can see, there are usually two or three, or there are three types that are mentioned. For instance, in Brian Gabriel's piece, he talks about manual, mechanical, and then electrical and electronic. We also want to keep in mind linguistic technologies or writing systems. So as we talk about linguistic technologies, if you had a video on writing systems, you might be able to go back to those and see kind of some of the content I've put in as far as linguistic writing systems and some of that stuff on language and how languages are developed. Especially for non-alphabetic text where it's kind of unusual writing systems or less common or less noticed. Those count as technologies, and language counts as a technology. It's developed for communication. But as we said, when we talk about the technological aspect of writing, we're usually thinking beyond how the words fit into some sort of context, and we're thinking about how they are involved in the process of production. More connected to linguistic technologies might be some of those things like punctuation, spacing between words, fonts, specific font styles that are meant to enhance uptake of information, including not just the spacing between letters, spacing between words, spacing between paragraphs, or indenting or tabbing. Those all count as technologies that are part of usually considered part of document design, but they were developed over time. And so they were added in to help us better process language. So we might get into some of those examples if we have time here for this video, but just know that those things count. So I usually I put those in that category of linguistic technologies. They're also components of document design, but they are developed as part of kind of in the text about how we deal with words. This also goes to the point of why do we have punctuation norms? It's partially a language thing, but the reason that's there is because using things like commas, spaces, periods, and other forms of punctuation are a way of adding clarity to a text so that your brain as a reader, or so that your readers' brains can download the information faster. So some of our sociocultural norms that we put on language are embedded in that need for clarity for a general reader, or for a stereotyped reader, a stereotypical reader, or a normative reader, which is the image we have of a reader who is kind of the dominant norm of a culture. So that's why we have some of those punctuation rules. I like punctuation in the frame of technology, and so I can say from a technological standpoint, punctuation is really helpful. It helps me structure, it helps me organize ideas, it helps me design for my reader an experience that allows them to take in information faster. And if there are punctuation norms or ways that we can use those technologies more effectively, okay, then I'll use them that way. But what I don't like, as you know from other videos, is I don't like when punctuation norms or spelling norms and things like that are taught as the only way to do this outside of a particular sociocultural context, that these are the rules, and if you don't do these, you're wrong. Because people use all kinds of punctuation norms. The worst thing you can do with punctuation is use it randomly. But if you've got an intention behind it and you're specific, or it's clear that you're using it consistently throughout, then a solid reader is going to try and read with you and see the pattern. If you think if you're not sure whether your reader's advanced, or if you think they're very advanced, it may help to connect to those specific sociocultural norms of clarity, so that they don't have to work as hard. That's really what it comes down to. That's enough of that. That was kind of a rant. Moving on. So there are all these different types of document design-oriented technologies. The closer they are to the word, the more likely I am to connect them to linguistic technologies. But when we talk about things designed to help us uptake information that are at the textual level, not at the production of text level, where then even like a genre could be considered a linguistic technology, or a technology, that something that was designed to enhance the way we communicate. Um, but it's a specific structure. Like IMRD format is a specific structure that was created to help scientists communicate information more effectively, and that was by Louis Pasteur. He set that system up because people were challenging some of his science, and he wanted them to be able to better replicate and better work through the discoveries he was making, and kind of add a foundation of knowledge to the scientific world at the time. And so IMRD format is a genre, it's a technology he designed. He designed a structure to writing that would allow scientists to accomplish their rhetorical purpose better, faster, stronger. Wait, that's different. You get the idea. So linguistic technology is usually connected to writing systems, sometimes connected to some of those other components of writing that go beyond the verbal, or go beyond the language itself, but are text-based. Manual technologies are like simple systems, hand tools. These are things, again, pens, pencils, mechanical pencils, all varieties of stylus as a category, which means the ones you use for a tablet or Palm Pilot count sometimes as hand tools, though we have other categories for that, so that's complicated. But quill and ink, hand chisel, cave paintings, these are all based on hand tools or manual systems. Manual, like manos, you may go in the bathroom and see lávense las manos at McDonald's or some other restaurant where it's got the English wash your hands and the Spanish. Depends on the region of the country you're in, I guess, or if you're even in the U.S. But that manual technology, that word manual, comes from that same root. And so it has to do with things in the hands. So hand tools and simple systems. If you have to physics it or chemistry it significantly to get it to work, it's probably not a simple system. It's probably not a manual technology. But things that you can hold in your hand, you pick up a charcoal stick and you start writing. You pick up a stick and start scratching the sand. You pick up a hammer and a chisel and you start kind of carving something out fairly easily. Like, that's a manual technology. Those are all simple. Now, some people will also, some people will deal with like electronic styluses. Some people will talk about like keyboards, and technically that's using your hands, but we'll get into a category and explain why there are better, more accurate technology labels for that. Still, I would say you could make a case. But let's get there. So once we get past simple systems, we shift into mechanical technology. So we got manual technologies and mechanical technologies. Manual, simple systems, hand tools, animal blood, paint, that like berry juice, that kind of thing. Mechanical technologies require a certain amount of processing to get the stuff to work. So physics and chemistry requires levers, requires gears, requires pulleys, springs, wheels. Some of those slightly more complex engineering systems. So mechanical technologies are closer to things like printing presses, the block press, typewriters, the old school typewriters, not electrical, but like 1800s typewriters, early 1900s typewriters, that kind of stuff that didn't run off of electric power, and a variety of other ones. So anything that it uses levers, gears, pulleys, wheels. Yeah, so we'll go with that. The next category would be electrical and electronic. Gabriel ties these together and kind of puts them in one category. Maybe he was running out of word space. Maybe it just made sense at the time. But I feel the need to separate these for my students. It just helps to me, there's a clear distinction we could make. So when we talk about electrical, it's like these are powered, but they're more hardware oriented. When we talk about electronic, they're more software oriented. And if there's a better term for this in the scholarship, and I just haven't found it yet, please forgive me. Let me know. Comment below if you find it. But building on some of the articles I have read in this area, these are the categories I use. So we've got the hardware oriented electrical. This means it's powered. And so these go back to, they're definitely more than mechanical. They require some sort of actual energy to get moving. And so and when I think of these, I think things that you have to plug in or charge or use a battery for. I don't necessarily think of like thermal energy or steam engine type energy as the kind of electrical we mean. But it's not something. It's not a hill I'm gonna die on. So yeah, but that's just a way for me to. That's one of the ways I try and work through it and make a distinction. Electronic is going to be more software oriented. These are specific apps or software pieces, specific types of coding. So if we're talking electrical technology, or if we're talking electronic technology, these anything, especially writing, anything we use to communicate that we might text through. So our messaging app, Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, Twitter, these are all specific writing technologies, software where we communicate with other people, send messages out into the world, or receive messages to ourselves. We can produce the text there. But also, in class today, I had someone bring up things like, do videos or movies count? And we ended up brainstorming into, some of that editing software, that sort of stuff. All of those count as writing technologies too. They're part of the process of technological and production, of textual production through the digital means. When we write in Google Docs, when we write in Notepad, when we write in OpenOffice or whatever, or Microsoft Word, all of those are digital forms of production, and those would be electronic software-oriented technologies. So to kind of lay this out a little bit, let's use non-writing technology since I've given you a couple examples of those. You thinking of sewing machines. Manual technology sewing machines is needle and thread. Simple system. I'm using my hand, and it's like so. What? A vest? I don't know. Mechanical technologies would be like the 1800s, early 1900s, before we had electrical systems kind of embedded in culture, and it was like those foot pedal machines you see sometimes in old movies. Or you might have come across at a yard sale or a consignment shop or Goodwill or some antique store, one of those old school foot pedal based sewing machines. And then we've got the more modern sewing machine where it doesn't have, where it's, you plug it in and the needle moves, but that's about it. There's a lot of gears and pulleys and mechanical levers and things like that to drop the foot and whatnot. And then you've got so those would be electrical. Then the electronic would be, which is kind of cool. I don't know if you ever watch like the PBS specials on sewing, but they've got some pretty cool stuff. But they've got machines for producing textiles, patterns and things like that, where you can program a stitch in, and it's got a digital readout and an LED screen, and all that fun stuff. That would be electronic. It requires software to work, and it pushes into that next level of technology. If that kind of clarifies how these things might lay out. But remember, we're really dealing with, and I guess technically, if you are doing some sort of embroidery and there's a message embedded into the cloth or into the fabric, you could call a sewing machine a writing technology if you really wanted to, because it does communicate. Kind of fun to think about. Start stretching those brain things and come up with some profound stuff. The last category I'll talk about and put in here is archival technologies. I do have a link for a really cool YouTube video on everything from, it's this one, go follow it. YouTube, oh, that's terrible. It's the World Science Fair, and they're discussing archival technologies and kind of the development of kind of shifting from scrolls to codex and the shift to books, that sort of thing. There's a whole panel, but it's a fun video. Watch it. But essentially, archival technologies is it's not just what we use to produce the text, so it's kind of in its own category. It's what we use to store the text once it's been produced. And there's been a lot more awareness pointed at archival technologies and the development of those, especially by more recently as we deal with lots of data and like the data rights and oh, my phone company has access to that information or keeps track of like all those things or cookies or whatever it is. And so We can look at archival technologies in a variety of ways, but if you're old school, you might remember index card library systems. If you have done anything on the web, Google is essentially a massive archive. If you've done library research, all of those little journals and things that you type in keywords into, those are essentially individual records that are stacked and archived in a special way. They're archived with a particular coding system so that they can be retrieved quickly. It is something that a lot of businesses have to remember to be more aware of when they're storing information and record numbers or invoice numbers or customer numbers and things like that. All of those things can be data points. So archival technologies could be anything from storing data points in Excel or Access. It could be when we produce texts and we put it in a filing cabinet and it's alphabetized based on customer name or time of year or whatever system we choose. But archival technologies are how do we store information so that we can retrieve it later? And again, that's where our brain comes back in as a writing technology that both produces text and stores data information, and so data information and experiences how we catalog it. There's a lot of fun research in all of these areas that could be a lot of that just is a great time to explore, and just some practical everyday stuff that as we begin to be aware of how we produce texts, we become better at producing them. We find new ways of adapting communication technologies to connect with other people, hopefully. And hopefully we will find, and hopefully it doesn't just become when we go to talk to other people about this, or when we discover it, it doesn't just become a rant about how millennials are kind of lost in their technology. Because sometimes we manage to deal with writing technologies in a way that allows us to create relationships, even if they're digital relationships, in other ways, especially in environments where maybe we don't have access to interpersonally to the same kinds of people. But that's a video for another time and a whole big issue, and it is a complex issue, and so there are a variety of perspectives when it comes to that. But it's always good to think more positively about the benefit of communicating with other people through a new technology. So with that, these are 6 categories of writing technologies we might use. I'm not saying it's comprehensive, but it begins giving us a model to start categorizing information into or types into and thinking about how each lens might apply. I've had students do this in some of my learning communities with math, where they looked at writing technologies as they apply to math writing technologies and ways math was communicated. Things like an abacus might count as a manual technology. A solar calculator might be considered electrical, but a TI-86 that's high software oriented might be considered electronic. So these sorts of things can be fun to think about. Data tables and stuff might be considered archival technologies. All kinds of fun stuff. That's cool. I had one, linguistic technologies might be considered Braille, or I had one student do an amazing article, an amazing essay on the Nemeth code, which was kind of a Braille, a linguistic system for mathematicians that connected to Braille. It was and so that great stuff. So there are a lot of different ways into writing technologies, thinking about how we produce texts. And the specific mechanisms we use, whether those are producing text physically or producing text digitally, or trying to just store memories, or how we store those texts once they are. It is recommended, just kind of as a quick note, it is recommended when you are in the habit of doing a series of drafts, for instance, it's good practice thinking archivally that when you go to save drafts, save the date for each draft as you write it, so that you have multiple files, or use programs like Google Docs that will keep track of changes. In past history, so that you can continue to look at all the versions you have. So that is when you go as a naming system, it's not uncommon for people to suggest using the date that this thing was edited as a tag at the end of the essay title, and make sure that if you're using naming systems for saving your essays, that you don't just say project 1, project 2, project 3, project 4, essay 1, essay 2, essay 3, essay 4, because when you have a new class, that's not going to be good enough. You're going to get another set of project 1, project 2s, and I have had students submit assignments that were not for my class, that were for another class they were having, and they weren't being specific enough in their naming system that they created to keep track of that information. So their archival technology was not functioning effectively. All right, with that, this video has gone long, as most of them do, and so we're going to call it quits. Thank you for hanging out through some of these parts of the technological aspect of writing. Try not to sneeze. I will talk more about things like accessibility and usability at a later time if we have time. But here is some of the big picture stuff, some of the cool stuff that's connected to the technological aspect of writing.